treinenmusea. Ze zijn er in Europa, maar ook in Amerika. Het California State Railroad Museum is in Sacramento. Een heel belangrijke stad in Californië, want het is de hoofdstad. Het is niet de grootste stad, dat is Los Angeles. Het is niet zo belangrijk als San Francisco, maar het is wel de hoofdstad. En het is een stad die eigenlijk aan de voet van de heuvels ligt, van de bergen. En in die bergen werd in het midden van de vorige eeuw goud gevonden. De Sacramento rivier en de Sacramento Valley waren dus heel belangrijk. En dat is ook de plek waar in eerste instantie de eerste treinen, hier dus aan de westkust van Amerika, kwamen. Treinen die werden gelegd over de bergen, door de bergen, met veel moeite, met veel hakken. En in de tijd dat ze er nog heel uitzagen als echte werkpaarden. Het stalen ros in die tijd. We gaan op bezoek in het Sacramento State Railroad Museum. We gaan praten met een van de gidsen daar en we gaan kijken naar al die prachtige oude treinen. California State Railroad Museum. California and Railroad, California and Gold, it's all related. We're talking with Dick Shimon, who is a tour guide at the museum. Yes. Tell us, what is the relationship between rail, trains, California, gold and Sacramento?
Well, the railroad was tremendously important to the development of California, because before they completed the Transcontinental Railroad, it took them like 5 to 6 months to get here by wagon train, a little faster if they rode a horse or walked. But after the completion of the railroad, they could make it to California in a week, 10 days. It depended much upon how much trouble they had getting across the plains, because the Indians were not too happy about the iron horse coming across their country. But the train was tremendously important to the migration of population to come to California, because California was already a state in 1850, and that's before the completion of the railroad. The railroad was not completed until 1869.
So our idea about Sacramento and the 49ers and the gold diggers, that was before the railroad?
Yes, yes. See, the gold was actually discovered in 1848, but 1849 is the popular, because that's when the big migration of people came to California for the railroad, for the gold.
And in 1950 they were able to take the train. Now, was that as easy as now, just buy a ticket, or?
Well, the train was not, the Transcontinental Railroad was not completed until 1869. Okay.
It's another 20 years.
Yeah, so it was quite a while after that.
But there were trains in the 40s and 50s in the States, but on the East Coast.
The East Coast was quite populated with trains. One of the big problems they had with the early trains back there was the mixed grade gauge of trains, because
the width of
the track. Yes, there was 5 foot was a fairly popular gauge, and then President Lincoln signed the order that said 4 foot 8.5 inches will be standard gauge in the United States.
Are they still?
Yes, and anything less than 4 foot 8.5 inches is called narrow gauge, but most commonly it's 3 foot. That's the most common narrow gauge railroad.
Now, we're here in a museum that is on the waterfront, near the riverboat. As I understand, Sacramento had no road in those days to, like in the 50s, to California. But it was the place where the railroad started, in California.
The first commercial railroad in California was actually built from Sacramento to Folsom. Now, Folsom is actually east of here, about 23 miles. And there was at one time as many as 23 wagon train that worked out of Folsom to feed manpower and machinery into the hill country and as far as into Nevada to support the mining industry. But I forgot what you asked me now.
Well, we are here on the cross where we are on the river, and we've seen these riverboats and the train station here. And as I understand, from here you can get to the the Pacific Ocean.
Oh yes, the Sacramento here is a deep water channel, and you can go all the way down to the Bay Area and into the Pacific Ocean. Yes.
Now, coming down to this museum, it's a state-owned museum, so the state obviously attaches some value to the historic value to the trains. What kind of trains do you get here? What kind of exhibits?
Today we have a very unusual situation in that we have the first locomotive of the Southern Pacific train. It was the C.P. Huntington. It's a locomotive here in our museum. When they started the Transcontinental Railroad, the railroad was called the Central Pacific, and later they changed their name to the Southern Pacific. So we have the number one locomotive of the Southern Pacific. Right across the hallway, we have the last steam locomotive that was ever, new steam locomotive that was purchased by Southern Pacific, and it's a cab forward. And it's an articulated engine, weighs over 1 million pounds. It's quite a piece of machinery. And it was the last one. They built 256 of the cab forwards, and this is the last one in existence right here.
Now it's electric or diesel, or what's common here?
No, we have several diesel electrics, and we have several steam locomotives. We have a Prairie class locomotive back there called the 1010. That's the number of the locomotive, and its wheel arrangement is a 262. And it was famous in its part of the run for the speed race that they had from the West Coast to Chicago. And it run a section down in the border between California and Arizona, I think is where it run.
Now, what I understand is going from here to over this continental railroad, the Pacific Railroad, you have to go over the mountains, the Rocky Mountains. They're pretty high. How did it work out with the weather and the snow?
Well, the big challenge was to get over the Sierras, not the Rocky Mountains. And just 100 miles east of Sacramento here is the Sierras, and the big thing...
That's where Reno is and the Lake Tahoe.
Yes. Reno is about 130 miles thereabout, but the challenge was to get over what they call Donner Pass. And in a little less than 100 miles, you're going to go from basically about 100 feet of altitude right here in Sacramento to a little over 7,000 feet. So that was the challenge, was the grade getting up over the hill. And when they built it, they had two real serious problems. One of them was the snow, and the other one was the difficulty of cutting the railroad into the granite. The granite was so hard up there. I think they cut something like 15 or 16 tunnels. The longest tunnel was what they call Summit Tunnel, which was 1,640 feet long. The granite was so hard that their progress was like only 8 inches a day.
And when you say cutting, this was manual labor? Very
manual labor. They used hammers, chisels, black powder. Dynamite had not been invented yet. It was a real labor, a real challenge to build that railroad.
Which also brought tens of thousands of Chinamen here to work on the railroad.
They first started with about a 50 of crew a crew of 50 of the Chinese to see how they would work. There was some skepticism as to if they would be successful because they were relatively small in stature, but they proved to be very successful. They hired somewhere between 10,000 and 14,000 Chinese. History disagrees a little bit about the number, but let's just say more than 10,000. They were so much in need of labor to build a railroad that they actually sent labor contractors to China to bring the workers over here to work building the railroad.
And when you now these days look around in Sacramento, you still see some of the Chinese buildings, the Chinese architecture around here, and there's still lots of people that live in Chinatown.
Yes, there is. Right across the road here, there's a complex that has the very definite Chinese architecture.
The site we're sitting here on is not original. I mean, this was not the railroad track in the old days?
Oh, yes.
Rebuilt.
Yes, it was. In fact, right here in the lobby where we're sitting is where they reassembled the first locomotive that came to Sacramento. Excuse me. There was no railroad, so the
reassembled. These were brought in parts from the East Coast by horses and then made into a locomotive here?
Not by horse. No, what they did is that they were built, like the one that we have here was built in Philadelphia. And it was the #1 locomotive of the Central Pacific Railroad. It was the first one that was here in Sacramento when they started the Transcontinental Railroad. They put it together. They tested it to be sure it would run. They took it apart and put it on a sailing ship and took it around South America to San Francisco. They took it off of the ship and put it on a riverboat, brought it to Sacramento, and they reassembled it in a shop that was right here in the vicinity of where this lobby is. Yes.
Okay, Dick, we're going to look around at the California State Railroad Museum, and we hope we can learn something from it for our history too, because the train started in Europe in the 1815 or something like that.
Early 1800s, yeah.
Days when there was a train that had a guy walk in front to make sure that everybody got out of the way.
Yes, they had to have a guard so that they'd scare the animals and stuff away, keep them off the track, yes.
Yeah, that nothing would ever exceed 15 miles an hour and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Well, thank you for your explanation. We're going to look around.